So at that time, I had a bass on my bench. It was a 32-inch scale bass that I was just about to finish. It was like I just was making the grooves in the nut and doing the final things. It was completely done. It was all ready to go. And it wasn't for anybody in particular. I think I was going to try to, there was a store up on 48th Street. We buy guitars. Richie, sometimes he would buy one of my instruments back in those days, and he had a customer in Japan or something like that he wanted to do. So he would do that. And I was going to do that with that bass. So I told Stanley, I said, well, look, I'll tell you what we can do. Why don't we do this? I'll go ahead and fix your bass. You know, I'll try to get it done by Monday. I don't think that's going to happen. But meanwhile, what I can do is this bass that's here, instead of making it into a regular bass, I could put some piccolo strings on it. Instead of making the nut like I was going to, I'll make it to accommodate, you know, the thinner strings, and you could try it out, and if you like it, you could just borrow it and play this, and then when we get the other one fixed, it would be cool. He said, well, when could you do that? I said, I'll do it right now. I said, you know, take me an hour, a couple hours, maybe, whatever, to get it to do that kind of. I said, why don't you and your wife go down? There was a little bar, a restaurant down in the corner. It's called Dem Bums. I used to play there a lot. Right down the street from my shop. I said, why don't you go down there and get yourself a sandwich and a glass of wine or something, or read the paper and come back up, and we'll see what happens, you know. So he did that, and we did that, and I put it together, and he came back up and played it. He says, Carl, this is really nice. He says, this is, I said, yeah, I think, you know, the 32-inch scale made a difference, you know. And he said, yeah, this is great. He says, well, you fix the other one up anyway. He said, who's this? Is this bass for anybody? Are you selling it or what? I said, well, no. I was just going to take it up to 48th Street and see. He says, so I could buy it if I wanted to. Could I buy it? I says, yeah, Stanley. But I started, oh, Stanley, please. I says, you're making me sound like I'm trying to rip you off or something. I can't fix your bass, but I'll sell you this one, you know. He looked at me, he says, Carl, please. You're Carl Thompson. He says, I've known you a long time. He says, this is Carl. Your poverty alone shows that you're not trying to rip anybody off, you know. He says, where's your BMW? Where's your villa in Spain, you know. He says, I would never think that. He says, no, you tell me what do you think? I'll buy it. I'll definitely buy it. I want to buy it. He said, I think this is the answer right here, you know. He said, I think this is what we've been looking for. So I think I said something like at that time, I think I said $1,200 or $1,000 or something like that. And I remember Stanley wrote me out a check for $1,800. And I said, Stanley, you don't have these? No. Yes, I do. And he was always like that. No matter what I charged him, he always gave me more than what I asked. He says, you don't charge enough. He says, and I appreciate the work. And that, my friends, that's the piccolo bass that you all talk about. That's how it happened. It wasn't even made for him. There's a lot of people out there saying they're responsible for this and they're responsible for that, and they did this and they did that. When in fact, the bass wasn't even made for Stanley. It was made for Richie up at, maybe. I wasn't even sure Richie was going to buy it. He probably would have, but I wasn't even sure, you know. What was going to happen? It wasn't even going to be a piccolo bass. It was going to be a regular short-scale 4-string bass. Until Stanley came in with his story, and we did it that way. That's how that happened. And that's the truth. That is the truth. That is exactly how that happened. And I would defy anybody to deny that. Because that is the truth. There's nothing. That's exactly the way it happened. As a matter of fact, just recently, how long ago was that, Brian? Stanley was in at the Blue Note.
December.
December.
Yeah, December 2004.
Yeah. Yeah, my friend Brian has always been a big Stanley Clarke fan and a McCoy Tyner fan. Ever since I've known Brian talks about McCoy Tyner. Anyway, Stanley was in town in December, January, somewhere around there, with McCoy Tyner and who was the drummer?
Billy Cobb.
Billy Cobb, that's right, yeah. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Who else would it be? It wasn't Gene Krupa, that's for sure. No, Gene, you're very cool, man. I love you. The story about Gene Krupa, too, I got to tell you. When I first came to New York. Anyway, getting back to Stanley, at the Blue Note, Brian has been a big fan of McCoy Tyner. He's all he ever talked about since I've known him. And I never met McCoy. I was a fan of his. I knew his music, of course, but I never met him. Anyway, Brian bought me a ticket, and we both went down there to hear these guys play. And then after the set was over, we went upstairs, and I saw Stanley. He had the door open. He said, "Hey, Carl, how you doing?" So we went inside, and Brian got to meet, and so did I, got to meet McCoy Tyner, and he got to hang out with Stanley Clarke. And I think Brian was just about ready to fall out of his shoes. He was, he was so excited, weren't you? He said it was hard for him to believe that he was actually in the same room with Stanley Clarke and McCoy Tyner and all that time, you know, hanging out like that. And Stanley and I talked about those days and about that time. And talking about, you know, him bringing his bass in with a broken headstock and all that. He remembered all that. I think he was kidding when he said he didn't remember giving me $1,800. I gave you $800? But I think he was just kidding. I'm sure he didn't remember that. Or maybe he didn't. Anyway, that's the story of the six-string bass. There's probably a lot more to it than that too, but I think that's pretty much it. Technically, that six-string bass, for those of you who want to know the technical aspects of it, it was made out of mahogany body. And the neck was maple, and the fingerboard was ebony, and I used 2 truss rods in the neck. It's the only time I've ever done that. Again, I'm making a six-string bass. I'm thinking we're going to have a lot of tension on this, and as a safety precaution, I thought it would be a good idea to have 2 truss rods. I found out later that, of course, that wasn't necessary. But they were put in. Greg Bennett put them in, because Greg and I talked about it, and I was trying to figure out. I just didn't want to put 2 truss rods in the way most people do. They just put them straight in like the neck. And I don't know why I thought like this, but I thought if I ran them parallel with the taper of the neck, you know, since the neck is, the neck at the nut is here, and it gets wider at the bottom in the ear. So when we put the truss rods in, rather than just putting 2 rods down the center, we ran the truss rods in that same direction. We put 1 rod over here and 1 rod over here. That was just, I thought that would be the way to do it. Again, it probably didn't matter, and probably made matters worse, actually, when we were carving the neck. We weren't too sure where the rods were at that point, so that was a problem too. You know, you don't know where you are, you know. Yeah, so this, you know, when people talk about, you know, they just write it off as like, well, it wasn't right. Well, of course it wasn't right, you know. What are you going to do, shoot me, arrest me because I didn't get it all right the first time? Huh? Please, you know, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't. I just wouldn't.